Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing very well-known Rambam. Much has been written about it in Perek Aleph of Hilchos Chametz Umatzah Halacha Zayin. And it's about Chatzi Shiur, eating less than the prescribed amount of chametz for which one would be liable. So the Rambam says as follows: Ha'echel min ha'chametz atzmei b'Pesach kol shehu. If anyone eats chametz without any other mixture, just chametz, but it's a small amount, it's nevertheless biblically forbidden. Shenemar, because it says lo ye'achel chametz, chametz shall not be eaten. V'aval pikein ein chayiv karas a korban el al kashir shukazais. You're not chayiv, you're not liable for the penalty of karas, or if it's done unintentionally, you don't have to bring a sacrifice. That's only if you ate a kazayis. So the question here is asked by the Kesef Mishnah, by the Mishnah Melech, and by dozens of others who cannot understand why the Rambam is deriving the prohibition of Chatzi Shiur, eating less than the prescribed amount, which is a kazayis, that is forbidden, from the pasuk Lo Ye'achel Chametz. There's a Gemara in Yuma, last chapter, where there's a machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. If Chatzi Shiur is forbidden by all prohibitions. Rabbi Lakish holds only midrabanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says minatera, and is derived from a pasuk kol chaylev l'Hashem, all of chaylev. That means even a small amount of chaylev is forbidden. And the Gemara also uses a svara chazi litztarufe, that you could combine it and it'll form a kazayis. Therefore, every part of it is forbidden. So there's a general rule, and the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan, that Chatzi Shiur is asim minatera by all prohibitions. So why do we need a separate pasuk by chametz? That's question number one. Question number two: how do you derive that from lo ye'achel? Lo ye'achel means chametz shouldn't be eaten. Achila is usually a kazayis. How do you know that even less than a kazayis, even a kol shehu, even a minuscule amount? So the Mishnah Melech brings from the Tshuvas of Maranach, one of the early Achreinim, who says that if it was only based on the pasuk of chaylev, we would say chametz is not analogous to chaylev. Why? Because chaylev is forbidden. There's never a time when chaylev is permissible. Masha'en kain, chametz, before Pesach, there's no prohibition of chametz. So chametz is a different kind of prohibition, and therefore we wouldn't have known that Chatzi Shiur is forbidden just by comparing it to chaylev. And that's why you need a separate pasuk. But the question that can still be asked is that true, Pesach is different, but so is Yom Kippur different. And the Gemara in Yuma applies Chatzi Shiur to Yom Kippur. If you eat less than the Shiur in Yom Kippur, it's forbidden because of Chatzi Shiur. But Yom Kippur it's not forbidden before Yom Kippur. Now there are some who say, a few svarim that I found, that, and it's essentially saying the words of the Malnach in different language, or maybe it's an interpretation of the Malnach, that there's a difference between Iser Gavra and Iser Chefza. There's an approach that all prohibitions that are subject to time, that are only forbidden at a given designated time, they are Isur Gavra. There the prohibition is on the person. The Chefza, the object that is forbidden, is not really forbidden. It's just the person is not allowed to eat it. So, according to this, chametz is an Isur Gavra, because it's only forbidden on Pesach. If it's an Isur Gavra, there's no reason why you would say Chatzi Shiur, because what is the svara of Chatzi Shiur? The svara is chazi litztarufe, that you could combine. What does that mean? So there are two different interpretations. One interpretation is that you're eating a half a kazayis, you may eat the second half. You can combine. So that's why the Torah wants you to avoid eating the first half, because you might come to eat the whole thing. But then there's the svara of the Rogatchover and many others who learn this way, and the Rebbe always repeats this approach, that chazi litztarufa is a sign that every bit of that food is forbidden. Because if you can take a morsel here, a morsel there, a morsel here, and you put it all together, it forms a kazayas, there's liability, there's a penalty of malchus or karas, that it proves in every little bit of it there's also some aspect of that prohibition. Not as severe, not as serious to warrant a penalty, but it's still forbidden. If that's the case, that only applies, one could argue, as they do, that only applies to Isser Chefza. Since Chametz is not an Isser Chefza, the Isser is not on the Chametz, it's on the person. You shouldn't eat Chametz if you say that prohibitions that are timely are only on the Gavra, on the person. Therefore, there's no Chatzi Shiur, there's no Chazilat Starufi. And therefore, the Rambam has to bring another pasuk, another source to say that Chatzi Shiur is forbidden. But this is problematic because the Gemara in Yuma applies this to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is certainly an Isser Gavra. Chametz is much more of a svara to say that the chametz itself is reprehensible. On Yom Kippur, food is not reprehensible. It's the person who's supposed to afflict himself. So it's a little bit problematic how we could say that you need a pasuk for Pesach, but you don't need another pasuk for Yom Kippur. Now, there's a famous answer of the Tzlach, the Noda B'Yehuda, who mentions this in his commentary on the Gemara Pesachim, also in his Shuvas, and there are many others, Chassam Sefer and others, who say the same thing. Since the reason for Chatzi Shiur being forbidden is because of Chazilat Starufi, what does that mean? They take the other approach, that you eat a half of kazayas, you might eat another half, and then you'll be liable. Therefore, the Torah wants you to avoid eating the first half. What would happen if it's the end of Pesach? The end of Pesach, you ate a half of kazayas. You can't, it's not Chazilat Starufi, because there's a minute later, a few seconds later, it's no longer Pesach. So it can never combine. If that's the case, Chametz, you would say, doesn't have the prohibition of Chatzi Shiur. Now, it's not clear what the tzlach means. L'cheira, he means that there's the danger that you may eat the full kazayas, but in this case, there's no such danger. Therefore, in that moment, at the end of the holiday, there would be no prohibition of Chatzi Shiur if it's based on Chazilat Starufa. That's why you need a pasuk. Or maybe the tzlach means, as I saw in a Kavitz, in a journal, Rabbi Lando, the previous rabbi of Bnei Brak, who says that they're trying to prove something, that since Chametz is the Chazilat Starufa doesn't apply to Chametz at the end of the holiday, that proves that the whole svar of Chazilat Starufa doesn't apply to Chametz B'chlal. To say that it applies only during one part of Pesach and not another part, therefore, Chatzi Shiur would not be forbidden based on the svar of Chazilat Starufa. That's why we need a pasuk Le'yachel by Chametz. Then, how do you know from Le'yachel that Chatzi Shiur is forbidden? So the Tzlach says, because Le'yachel is the source that the Rambam himself mentioned a few paragraphs before, that Chametz is Asur B'Hana, that Chametz you're not allowed to derive any benefit from. And therefore, when you eat less than a zayis, though it's not called achila, but it's benefit, you don't enjoy eating a piece of Chametz that's less than a kazayis. So therefore, since there's a prohibition of Hana, therefore, Chatzi Shiur is Asur. The Rogatchover gives another explanation, a little bit similar to this one, but with another twist. The Yerushalmi in Trumas says that when it comes to Isur Hana, even Rish Lakish agrees that Chatzi Shiur is forbidden. Probably because of the svara that if the Isur is B'Hana, there's Hana even less than a Shiur. So the Rambam brings the pasuk Le'yachel that even Rish Lakish would agree that here Chatzi Shiur is forbidden. Now, these approaches are a little bit difficult to say that, number one, as the Tzlach says, that because it's not going to be Chazilat Starufi at the end of Pesach, therefore there'd be no Isur of Chatzi Shiur. That's a little bit difficult to say. And likewise, the Rogatchover's explanation, why would the Rambam be concerned with the opinion of Rish Lakish? We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, even the Chesiru Achila have a din of Chatzi Shiur. So why does the Rambam have to bring a pasuk to satisfy the opinion of Rish Lakish, which we don't follow anyhow? So there's another approach, say from Mishnas Yavitz, where he gives and I saw this in other Svarim as well, that it seems that there's a general question about Chatzi Shiur. Chatzi Shiur is forbidden in every prohibition. The question is, if you eat a Chatzi Shiur of one Isur, of one prohibition, is it the same Isur as eating a Chatzi Shiur of another? Let's say you eat Chatzi Shiur of Chametz, and you eat Chatzi Shiur of Basar B'chalav. Are you guilty of the same transgression? Chatzi Shiur is a prohibition, independent. There's a similar question about Lefnei Iver, Leisitin Michshel. You're not allowed to put a stumbling block before the blind, cause someone to do an Aveda. Is there a difference if the Lefnei Iver is, let's say, for Shabbos, or Lefnei Iver is for something else, less stringent than Shabbos? Or is Lefnei Iver a separate prohibition that if you are responsible for someone, you facilitate someone transgressing, there's an Avera, Lefnei Iver. It has nothing to do with the Avera, in the specific Avera you're causing the person to violate. Same thing over here. Is Chatzi Shiur connected to each prohibition, that if you have a Chatzi Shiur of Chametz, it's a Chametz prohibition. A Chatzi Shiur of Basar B'chalav, a Chatzi Shiur of Nevela is a Nevela and Basar B'chalav prohibition. So this question, it seems, is already mentioned in the Rishonim. The Ramban in Yuma, the Gemara in Yuma has a whole sugya when you have a person whose life is in danger and the only food you can give him is something that's not kosher. You have to do hakal. You have to try using the less stringent, the less serious transgression. So the Ramban asks the question, normally when someone's life is in danger, you don't feed them a whole amount, you give them a little bit, a taste. It's a Chatzi Shiur. So what's the problem? What's the difference between one prohibition and another? In either case, you're only doing a violation of Chatzi Shiur. So the Ramban gives two answers. One answer he gives that even when it's less than a shiur, there's a difference in the stringency between one transgression and another. So what you see from that is that according to the Ramban's answer, the prohibition is not just one general prohibition of Chatzi Shiur. The Chatzi Shiur of Chametz is a Chametz prohibition. The Chatzi Shiur of Nevela is a Nevela prohibition. And therefore, if you have a choice of giving one or the other, you give the Nevela, because Nevela is only a lav. Chametz has kares. Chametz is more stringent. Chametz is more stringent. So even the Chatzi Shiur of Chametz is more stringent than the Chatzi Shiur of Nevela. And then the Ramban gives another answer. He says it could be in a case where the doctor said that he has to eat a full shiur. And that's what the Gemara is talking about. If you ate less than a shiur, it wouldn't make a difference. So you see the Ramban anticipates both sides of this question. And this is how he answers the Rambam. Why the Rambam says that you know Chatzi Shiur by Chametz from the Pasuk Le'yachil. Because he assumes over here, and he has proofs from other places, that the Rambam holds that Chatzi Shiur in general is a general prohibition, and it doesn't make a difference which prohibition. The Chatzi Shiur of Nevela is no different from the Chatzi Shiur of Treifa, Chatzi Shiur of Basar B'chalav. Whatever the prohibition is, Chatzi Shiur is one prohibition. There's no more strictness of one against the other. That's why the Rambam says, if Chametz would be based strictly on the din of Chatzi Shiur that is mentioned in all Isurim and all prohibitions, then the Chatzi Shiur of Chametz would not be more stringent than Chatzi Shiur of any other prohibition. But by Chametz, there's a special halacha, the Le'yachil, which implies that it shouldn't be eaten under any circumstances, even if it's less than the shiur. But when you eat less than a shiur, you're eating Chametz. It's a prohibition of Chametz. It's not a general prohibition, which we learn out from Kol Chaylev and Chazilitz Darufei. Here it's based on the prohibition of Chametz itself. And therefore, if you had a question of giving a chayla Chametz less than a shiur, or you have the opportunity to give him some other prohibition, Basar B'chalav, Nevela, Treifa, which is only a lav, Machalas Asuris, in general, you would have to give them the Machalas Asuris and not the Chametz. Why? Because the Chatzi Shiur of Chametz is more stringent than the Chatzi Shiur of other prohibitions. Chatzi Shiur of Chametz is a Chametz prohibition, and that's more stringent than all the others.